Yeah, good. Okay, so thank you, Yannis, for the introduction. And before I start, I would like to express my sincere gratitude and respect to Yannis and his colleagues for organizing and delivering this wonderful conference in these difficult times. Today, I would like to talk about lexically valued signs in the current Japanese writing system. This title may be supplemented with the subtitle towards a new description and taxonomy, as has been suggested to me by one of the anonymous reviewers. The goal of this presentation is to address the diversity of what I term lexically valued signs in the Japanese writing system, and to present a tentative description and taxonomy of such signs. Let me briefly sketch out some of the key notions before going into details. Firstly, Japanese written signs can be divided into 4 main groups based on the genealogical origins. These are called kanji, hiragana, katakana, and romaji. As we will see later, they are assigned different functions and are mixed to form a multi-component writing system. Secondly, some of these signs are lexically valued, and these are the main focus of this presentation. Such signs represent monomorphemic or polymorphemic units. I use lexically valued as an umbrella term to cover both types. There are more common labels out there, such as pleremic, logographic, and morphographic. And I actually agree with Terry Joyce, who suggested yesterday that pleremic would be a good shorthand. But the notion of plereme has certain theoretical assumptions about language and writing. And I would like to think about these assumptions before adopting the term. So in this talk, I will stick with the lexically valued label, which I think is more or less theory neutral. Thirdly, some other signs are phonologically valued or associated with monosegmental or polysegmental units. They are usually referred to as phonemic or phonographic signs in the literature. Finally, and most importantly, I distinguish 2 approaches to accounting for writing systems, which I call Signary-based and sign-based accounts. A Signary-based account makes theoretical generalizations at the expense of what are deemed exceptions. With regards to Japanese, this approach categorizes kanji as lexically valued and all other signaries as phonologically valued. While this approach is useful for capturing the core principles governing each signary, it misses out many important features of the writing system in question. In contrast, a sign-based account makes descriptive generalizations without ignoring those so-called exceptions. Regarding Japanese, the second approach shows that all signaries contain different types of lexically valued signs. I will argue that it is crucial to have both kinds of accounts to gain a fuller understanding of this writing system. So let's start by looking at how grapholinguistics account for signs, signaries, and writing systems. Firstly, written signs. Using Sosu's dyadic model of signs, we can say that all written signs comprise a graphic form as the signifier and linguistic value as the signified. Importantly, signs are classified by both these properties. Let's look at the forms of signs taken from the historical and modern Irish writing system. We could describe the first sign on the left-hand side as being single graph or monographic. The second one in the middle is the same graph accompanied by a diacritic. The third one on the right is a functional unit formed by 2 separate graphs, often designated as a digraph or polygraph more in general. It is very common to use this sort of classification to account for the formal aspects of writing written signs. Turning now to the values of signs, let's look at 3 items from the English writing system this time. We've already seen the letter P on the left-hand side, but with a focus on its value this time, we can describe it as being segmental or more generally phonologically valued. On the other hand, the heart sign in the middle is associated with a meaning instead of a phonological value. So it may be described as an indexical sign or more broadly, a semantically valued sign. This is different from the euro sign on the right-hand side, where the graphic form is associated with both the phonological form and the lexical meaning. Interestingly, this last sign is rendered as the singular euro in some contexts and as the plural euros in other contexts. Examples like this one call for an umbrella term for both monomorphemic and polymorphemic signs, which I refer to collectively as lexically valued signs. Now, what happens when we look at signs as a set? All writing systems have at least one signary or set of signs. Crucially, they are commonly classified by the dominant value type in the core signary. Let's illustrate this point with English again. This writing system employs a signary known as the Latin alphabet, or a set of phonologically valued signs adapted from the Roman literate tradition. Most signs represent individual segments like the letters A, B, and C. However, the English alphabet also contains the letter U representing the syllable U as well as other sounds. It also includes the letter X, which represents a consonant cluster K, S. And besides the alphabet, English employs a number of signs with morphemic and semantic values. So we have several signaries in this writing system. Despite all these features, English is often described as a monosegmental writing system or phonemic writing system. Such an account ignores both the polysegmental signs in the alphabet and also the morphemic and semantic signs in the non-alphabetic signary. It is this sort of abstraction that characterizes what I term the Signary-based account of writing systems. Here, abstract and theoretical generalizations are prioritized over what are considered exceptions within and across writing systems. So for the English example we saw earlier, those polysegmental signs and morphemic signs are considered exceptions. Gelb makes this point very clear in his famous statement. There are no pure systems of writing, just as there are no pure races in anthropology and no pure languages in linguistics. Skipping a few words, a system of writing at one period may contain elements from different phases of its development. Again, skipping a bit, it is impossible to take account of all these minor divergences. Long and complicated terminologies might be introduced to include all the characteristics of a system, but that would only tend to obscure the issue. So, taking this approach, we must make the important decision of what features of a writing system are relevant and hence require attention, while deciding what other features should be dismissed as minor divergences. Kulmas also makes a similar point. The value of typological classifications is precisely that they elevate certain features to categorical status at the expense of others, thereby sorting out the critical from the less important characteristics of the systems under consideration. The underlying theoretical decisions may not always be sound, but in the form of typologies, they are brought out into the open and hence made susceptible to rectification. Typologies thus serve an important heuristic function. As these two statements tell us, a Signary-based account of writing systems are abstractions and generalizations by nature. This is in fact useful to capture the core principles underlying a given writing system or to discover similarities and differences between writing systems. However, as we saw in the example of English earlier, this means that some features get little to no attention at all. It is certainly one way to look at writing systems, but not the only way. I would argue that a sign-based account is as important as a Signary-based account. In the sign-based approach, concrete and descriptive generalizations are prioritized over categories within and across writing systems. This is not to say that abstractions and generalizations are not important. On the contrary, we should take both approaches to broaden and deepen our understanding of how writing systems work. With these points in mind, let us now look at the main topic of this presentation, the Japanese writing system. As already mentioned by myself and by many other speakers in this conference, this system employs a mixture of four main signaries called kanji, hiragana, katakana, and romaji. This is illustrated in this slide with the sentence, Naruto is a Japanese animation program, which is written in the signs of all four types. Now, to talk about writing systems, it's important to look at the language itself, but unfortunately, we don't have the time to look at the details now. But anyway, these are some of the key features of the lexicon, phonology, morphology, and syntax of contemporary Japanese. One thing I should mention is that this language has a multi-layered lexicon consisting of native Japanese, Sino-Japanese, foreign, and mimetic elements. In addition to these four sublexicons, a fifth class of hybrid lexemes are also very common. Now, proceeding to the elements of writing, this slide shows a summary of the four signaries. The kanji signary contains a large number of phonetic signs, which are used mainly to write native and Sino-Japanese lexical words, as well as the stems of verbs and adjectives. Contrastively, the hiragana signary has a much smaller number of signs, which are used mainly for the representation of functional morphemes and some lexical words of native and Sino-Japanese origins. Katakana signs are also relatively small in number, but they are employed for different types of words and functions compared to hiragana. Finally, the use of romaji signs, or the letters of the Latin alphabet, is also increasingly common in today's Japanese. They are not only used for representing foreign loan words, but also for abbreviated denotations of native and Sino-Japanese words. In the literature, it is very common to provide a Signary-based account of the Japanese writing system. Even the small sample of descriptions presented here shows us this tendency for an abstract and categorized treatment of the four signaries just mentioned. As we can see, a wide range of terms are used to label kanji, and with the exception of ideographic, they all indicate that this signary is described as a collection of lexically valued signs, even though there are some differences in details. Now, moving to the next part of this same list. This is not the case with hiragana and katakana, which are traditionally characterized as syllabic and more recently as moraic. Not all studies mention romaji, but when they do, this signary is usually characterized as phonemic. The important question is, how accurate are these characterizations? The answer to that question is not very. To begin with kanji on the left-hand side, it is true that individual signs tend to represent morphological units, or more precisely, single morphemes. This is illustrated by the representation of the Sino-Japanese word kanji, where the two graphs correspond to the two constituent morphemes, respectively. The same can be said for the native Japanese word kotoba, meaning word. Sometimes a single kanji can also represent a monomorphemic word, like te, hand. However, it is easy to find counterexamples to this one-to-one correspondence between kanji graphs and morphemes. Regarding the first example highlighted in yellow, there is no reason to believe that aisatsu, greeting, is synchronically polymorphemic, although it is historically a bimorphemic compound borrowed from Chinese. In other words, the two graphs form a single unit representing the monomorphemic word in question. The next example, seishin, is a little more tricky because it could be analyzed as either monomorphemic or bimorphemic, depending on what morphological analysis we choose to use. The reverse is also true, as is exemplified by tenohira, palm, where a single graph corresponds to the trimorphemic lexeme. Proceeding to the examples of hiragana, katakana, and romaji, these signs are basically phonologically valued in some cases, but they can also be used lexically in other cases. The first two highlighted items are the hiragana and katakana signs designated for the accusative particle o. The katakana sign is placed in brackets because it is not as frequent as its hiragana counterpart, but it is found in actual texts. The romaji example at the bottom is rather interesting because the WC representation was originally used as the abbreviation for water closet, but today it is more common to render it as toire, another long word for toilet. What is important here is that these actual items are rarely acknowledged in Signary-based accounts. They are either briefly mentioned and categorized as exceptions or left out altogether in the description. However, a full account of the writing system should say something about examples like these. In the next two parts, I will attempt to give a tentative treatment of such items. So let's start with kanji. As already noted, kanji signs tend to represent individual morphemes. Looking at the examples here, this is indeed the case in the single graph representation of Sino-Japanese I, love, and native Japanese koi, yearning. The same is also applicable to the Sino-Japanese compound, aijo, affection, and the native Japanese compound, koibumi, love letter. In all these cases, there is a clear one-to-one relationship between the graph and the morphemes. However, sometimes a single graph can correspond to a morphologically complex word like goza, matting, or tenohira, palm. Having said that, there is only a small number of examples like these, and today it is more common to write such polymorphemic words in multiple kanji or using the combination of kanji and other signs. Moving on to the bottom part of the table, we have already seen aisatsu, greeting, and seishin, spirit, in which a string of multiple graphs corresponds to a single morpheme, even though we must take into consideration what morphological analysis we use. Similar examples are abundant not only in the Sino-Japanese vocabulary, but also in the native Japanese sublexicon. Here it is illustrated with inaka or countryside, which is definitely monomorphemic in structure. We will return to items like these shortly. Proceeding to the right bottom part of the chart, it is not easy to find example of multi-graph representations of polymorphemic words, although I have been able to find some items such as それはさておき, setting it aside. Based on these observations, I propose a new taxonomy of kanji signs based on the structures of their forms and values. In the top part of this chart, we have monographic monomorphemic on the left and monographic polymorphemic on the right. At the bottom, polygraphic monomorphemic is distinguished from polygraphic polymorphemic. As already noted, it is not easy to find examples of the two types highlighted in blue on the right-hand side. On the other hand, there are many items belonging to the polygraphic monomorphemic type, here highlighted in yellow. We don't have much time to examine this in detail, but there are two interesting studies in this regard. I will discuss them later if time allows. So this is the first study, and this is the second one. Let's skip these and go straight to this one. Let's now proceed to take a look at lexically valued signs in hiragana, katakana, and romaji. As we saw earlier, sometimes hiragana and katakana signs may represent morphemes instead of phonological units. Firstly, there is one hiragana sign that is morphemic in nature, which we saw earlier, representing the accusative particle o, and the katakana counterpart also exists, but it is rarely used today. There are two more hiragana signs representing another pair of particles, but they are basically moraic signs that are also used morphemically. What is more interesting is the presence of lexically valued signs in romaji. Again, these signs represent phonological units in many cases, but function as lexically valued signs in other cases. There is an abundance of examples of such usage, and this slide presents a handful of interesting cases. In the interest of time, I must skip the details, but let's come back to these examples if we have enough time. These and other examples demonstrate that lexically valued signs are not limited to kanji as is widely believed. Perhaps we can reasonably treat the hiragana and katakana items as exceptions, but a further investigation is definitely needed for romaji. In fact, our colleagues Sven Osterkamp and Gordian Schreiber brought this point to my attention a few years ago, and I would like to take this opportunity to send them my special thanks. Using the same scheme I proposed for kanji, we can classify lexically valued signs in hiragana, katakana, and romaji as shown here. So this brings us to my last slide. To sum up my talk, I have argued for the importance of a sign-based account of lexically valued signs in the Japanese writing system. I have demonstrated that this approach calls for a new description and taxonomy of such signs. Here, my proposed classifications are merged into a single taxonomy. To repeat myself, sign-based accounts should go hand in hand with Signary-based accounts to provide a broader and deeper understanding of how written signs function in Japanese and possibly beyond. As a next step, I would like to test the validity of this approach and carry out a further investigation of kanji and romaji. This is the references list. I will send the file to Yanis later. And so this is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention. ご清聴ありがとうございました。
Thank you. I have a question from Amalia.
Hi, lovely talk. Very interesting.
Thank you.
This is maybe more in the nature of a comment, but I know at this point we're all decades past Gelb's unidirectional development of writing systems, but I just thought it was worth maybe pointing out that your work is a great counterexample to his hypothesis, because the katakana, the hiragana, and the romaji signs that have lexical values, those post-date their phonographic values. And so the addition of these to the lexically valued sign inventories in Japanese is a great counterexample to Gelb's work. And of course, we see that in other languages too. You know, English texting, more and more lexically valued uses of the Roman alphabet. So I just, you know, thought that might be worth pointing out. As I say, we're all past that idea by now, but it's a nice counterexample.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's a great point. And yes, for hiragana and katakana, there is a historical background for why we use those specific characters for certain morphemes. But yes, that's a very good counterexample to Gelb's claim. And also romaji is very interesting because, you know, the Japanese adopted those that new script at a certain point of time in history. And of course, they were meant to be phonologically based. But today, yes, we do use it in various ways, including phonological and lexical signs. So thank you.
And a question by Terry Joyce.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, are you inviting me? Sorry, I didn't hear you. But so if I can, I think the issue really is essentially about the proportions of morphographic usages and what you're calling lexically valued. You note that the latter of.
Sorry, I can't hear you. The sound suddenly stopped. Is it only me?
The question's in the chat as well. You could read it there.
Oh, thank you. Hold on. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Briefly lost connection.
Right.
But I'm basically saying you acknowledge them as exceptions. So and certainly a full account needs to acknowledge those other uses. But are you aware of any empirical studies about the balance? You know, it is an issue of whether we are trying to recognize the core principle or just deal with the exceptions and overemphasize them.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. That's a good point. And if I am allowed to share the screen again, hold on. What was that? Yeah. Sorry. Yes. So my gut feeling is that kanji should be primarily morphographic or monomorphemic. But to say that in clear terms, we need some more considerations. And actually, this point is related to the two studies I quickly mentioned in my talk. This is from Morioka's survey of productivity of 6,000 something kanji defined by the Japanese industrial standard. And according to his count, these type D and E are kanji graphs only used in polygraphs. And they account for like 16 something %, not a big quantity, but I don't think they should be ignored altogether. And also for types F and G, yes, we do have lots of kanji with obsolete or unknown meanings. Perhaps, you know, the nature of this set of kanji needs to be taken into consideration, but there is an indication that non-morphographic kanji have a certain proportion in the kanji used today. And the second study is by Honda, not me, but another Honda, semantic transparency of 958 common two kanji compound words. And according to Honda, yes, there are many two kanji compounds where the meanings of the words cannot be predicted from the meanings of the constituent kanji. And if we assume morphemes to be units of meanings plus forms, then the fact that we can't see the meaning of these kanji in certain words is a problem for the morphographic account of kanji, I think. So I'm not saying that kanji should not be morphographic, but we need more consideration and investigation about different aspects of kanji morphography.
Well, if I could briefly reply, you are talking about the larger set of the 6,000 JIS Ichi,
Right.
Really, those only account, I can't remember the exact number that I have published in the past, but it's only about 90% of a corpus, BCWJ. So again, they are marginal. And again, if in counter to the Honda study, you also are aware of the semantic transparency studies that my own colleagues and I have commented on, where he surveyed and many people regarded them as being semantically transparent. So it kind of, again, it's an issue of balance.
Exactly. Yes, the issue is balance is very important. Do I have enough time to reply to that, or should we talk later?
Yes, go on. We still have 2 questions.
Thank you. Okay, so can I talk to Terry now?
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
No, respond to the other question. Go to Richard's question. All
right. Yeah. Then let's have a chat later. Thanks.
Yeah, just so my question, it's kind of, I'm not sure exactly how to put this, but you have cases obviously where you have multiple spellings for what's essentially the same morpheme. So an example would be like Sumedagawa versus Sumedaku in Tokyo, which now have different spellings because of historical changes in the spelling, and yet presumably it was the original Sumida would have been the originally the same thing, but now confusingly they're spelled in 2 different ways. What does that, and there are many such cases, I believe. So what does that say about the relationship between morphemes and writing? I mean, does that bear on this at all, or it's kind of a vague question, but maybe
Yeah, that's a very good point. Thank you for that. Sorry, I mistakenly sent it to another person. So these are the kanji Richard is talking about, I think. Yes. In my past studies, I have discussed. Well, I have tried to discuss some aspects of orthographic variation, both synchronic and diachronic. And yes, examples like these pose a very interesting point about the morphemic or morphographic basis of kanji. There is no denying, well, perhaps we can say, even in these cases, individual characters tend to correspond to morphemes, although place names are a bit tricky. But yes, we certainly need to take this kind of variation into consideration. And yeah, I'm not really ready to give a definite answer to that question, but yes, I believe this is a very important aspect of kanji that should be discussed more fully.
Right. I mean, maybe a better example would have been Yagura, as in the keep of a castle, which has both I believe both single kanji representation and also a 2 kanji representation, which is the literal breakdown of arrow storage, right?
Okay, yeah, that's an interesting example. Yeah, yes, as we saw somewhere, yes, I guess this example is from your work, Richard. Goza can be written monographically, but it is more common to do so using 2 graphs. So polymorphemic monograph or polymorphemic not polygraph here, sequence of monographs. So yes, this is another case of variation, I guess. And again, yes, we need to think about these
Thank you.
now a question by
Thank
Helen.
you.
本田先生、ご発表ありがとうございます。
ありがとうございます。
In response to the previous conversation regarding the productivity of regarding exceptions and so on, I think for me as a pre-modernist, the beauty of this is that it allows me to describe what I'm seeing in pre-modern texts, and many of the exceptions, the things that are very exceptional now were certainly not exceptional in different periods, and it also allows me to describe how describe different ways of using things for particular semiotic effects. So this was more of a response to the question than a question for you, but it's my sense that this can be really developed further to describe how Japanese writing works diachronically and how writing works more in a more sophisticated way. So その辺はありがとうございます。Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen-san. I'm really glad to hear that. And yes, as your beautiful presentation yesterday showed us, that pre-modern and pre-typographic Japanese writing has lots of properties that are not found in today's Japanese. And today's Japanese writing system is an end product of attempts to standardize the printed, well, not necessarily printed, but the way we write the language. And this standardization has ditched various properties. And I believe that these, past properties of Japanese writing system do provide with us a lot of interesting aspects of writing, not only in Japanese, but in writing in general. So thank you so much.
And one last very short question, because everybody's very hungry here.
Sorry.
I will play the devil's advocate on typography. You have mentioned Romaji and gave some examples. And from my point of view, as a gaijin, as a Westerner, there are two kinds of Romajis. There is the one using half-width characters, so fixed width characters, and the one used variable width characters. And I was wondering, so for me, these fixed width characters look like if Japanese want to put order on this chaotic Latin script with variable widths. Is there a connotation on using fixed width characters in Japan, or is it just random depending on the font?
I'm very sorry, I didn't really get your point. What do you mean by variable and fixed?
Those characters you're showing on your slide.
Yes.
Half-width characters. They are in a table.
Oh, half-width, yes, okay, yeah.
So they are fixed width characters. Letter I has the same width as letter W. Connotation for using them in Japanese, or is it just a random choice of font?
Basically, yes. There is no fixed rule or whatsoever for half width versus full width characters in Japan. However, so for example, I just posted in the chat window the examples of full width and half width F. To my knowledge, in official document making, people are instructed to use the full width characters. I don't know why, but that's the tradition. So there, in certain contexts, there may be some, how do you call it, extra linguistic values or connotations associated with the difference. In casual usage, however, I'm not really sure if there is any meaning associated with the choice between those two.
Okay, thank you. And I have a last question by Daniel.
Into the chat just in case. Two quick ones. So the tenohira word, in Chinese, it's monomorphemic, zhang. I wonder if that's the origin of these things, which fits in with Terry's question about exceptionality. You'd be looking then just at words that are monomorphemic in Chinese, but not in Japanese. And the other thing is the word club, there's a kanji writing of it, which is like together fun unit or something like that. And I wonder where that fits in your typology, because it's writing a foreign word in kanji, but it's both a semantic and a phonological match. Probably also really exceptional again, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you, Dan. For tenohira, yes, I haven't looked into the history of this particular character, but I presume that this is the case of importing the Chinese character and associating the Japanese equivalent with the original Chinese value, and that happens to be polymorphemic in Japanese. And well, there are many examples, similar examples, like tenohira. What was that? Yes, tenohira. For example, mizumi is a very typical example. In one morphological analysis, this can be analyzed into mizu, water, and umi, sea. However, this is probably a historical origin of the word rather than the synchronic reality of the word in today's Japanese, where it can be considered as a monomorphemic word. So yes, this is another tricky part of deciding what kind of morphological analysis we should adopt when dealing with kanji. And in terms of kurabu, yes, this is a bit outdated, but yes, we do still use this kanji representation of the foreign word. And yes, as you correctly pointed out, the three kanji corresponds to the sounds, the first one to ku, the second one to la, and the last one to bu. And yes, the sequence also has a, well, kind of happy meeting connotation. So yeah, the phonological and semantic properties of both kanji and words should be taken into consideration. And the taxonomy I proposed here does not really or is not really ready to do that. Elsewhere, I have discussed some parts of that, but I need to look into how I can integrate, this part of kanji writing.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Keisuke.
Thank you.